One of the things that is really important for parents to understand is the importance of regular practice. So when the children are learning a new skill, that home practice is really important, because with fluency and with motor speech, it's very much a motor skill, and the more you do it, the more it becomes a habit and automatic.
Welcome to Some Stutter Law, Newfoundland Labrador's first podcast about stuttering. My name is Greg O'Grady, and I am a person who stutters and a co-host of Some Stutter Law, Newfoundland Labrador's first podcast about stuttering, along with my co-hosts.
And I'm Katelyn Mayo. I'm a future speech-language pathology student, and I'm Greg's co-host on this podcast.
Some Stutter Law mission is dismantling and rebuilding stuttering. Let's start listening. Some Stutter Law mandate is in the spirit of Newfoundland Labrador's humor, robust and frank interactive discussions. Some Stutter Law podcast aims to rebuild confidence and hope for today's and tomorrow's persons who happen to stutter by dismantling stuttering myths, stigma, stereotypes, and barriers.
The objectives of Some Stutter Law podcast are supporting, raising awareness, and increasing understanding and acceptance of stuttering, providing people who stutter, their families, professionals, students, and the general public with current information, research, and resources about stuttering, and promoting advocacy and support for people who stutter.
Today, Some Stutter Law welcomes Margit Pukonen. Margit is the coordinator of ministry training projects at the Speech and Stuttering Institute. She received her Master's of Health Science degree in Speech Language Pathology from the University of Toronto and has worked at the SSI, formerly Speech Foundation of Ontario, since it opened its doors in 1980s. She has been a frontline clinician, managed the clinical programs, and has overseen the development and evaluation of new treatment and professional training programs for children with motor speech disorders. She has participated in research studies and co-authored publications on the subject. She also has extensive experience running and developing group therapy programs and professional training workshops. Currently, Margit is involved in the conversion of the Speech and Stuttering Institute's Toronto preschool motor speech and fluency training programs into e-learning courses. So welcome, Margit, to Some Stutter Law podcast. And thank you very much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, Margit, I understand from George Shields. George was a recent guest on the Speech on the Some Stutter Law podcast, and as you're aware, George is 91 years old and is a long-standing volunteer with the Speech and Stuttering Institute. And he had informed us during the interview that you were one of the first speech language pathologists hired shortly after you graduated. Can you share how you initially heard about the Speech and Stuttering Institute, your history with the Speech and Stuttering Institute, and working with Dr. Kroll, the past executive director of the Speech and Stuttering Institute, who recently passed away?
This is an interesting question because it helps me to retrace my career in the profession, going back right to the roots. As George had mentioned, I was a new grad, so I was working at a general hospital with a general caseload, filling in for somebody who was on maternity leave, and I was obviously looking for another position. And there was an ad that was out for a pilot project by the Speech Foundation Ontario to look at group therapy for preschool. So I thought that sounded rather interesting, and I applied for the position, and George was one of the panel that interviewed me, and I was hired. And it was such an interesting position and really very exciting because the barber shoppers had, renovated this house on Grenville Street, which was next to the U of T speech pathology department. And there was an idea or a vision of a program for children who were in preschool. At that point, that was really JK, SK children. And looking at, is group therapy a good way of providing service to this population? Because at that point, all therapy was pretty well one-to-one. And so it was a very new project, and that 2-year start turned out to be a 40-year career at the SSI. And so my role has changed very much over the years. So I started off as a new clinician, working in this new program, building it up. And then in the 90s, the executive director at that time resigned, and I took over as the program director for running what was then the Children's Speech and Language Program. And around that same time, the Clark Institute, where Bob Kroll was working, was changing their mandate and was cutting services offered through the Clark Institute. Now, I had known about Bob Kroll. My schoolmates had placements with him, but I had not actually met him or worked with him. And when that program at the Clark was being closed, there was a public pushback on the defunding of this very well-known and effective program. And at this point, Bob was winding down the clinic at the Clark, and he was preparing to launch a private practice in stuttering. And we got the Speech Foundation, as it was called at that time, got a phone call from the ministry saying, if we transfer some money to you, will you take over administering and oversight of the stuttering program? So the board of the Speech Foundation said, yes, we would be happy to do that. So Bob's stuttering program got added to the programs that were falling under the umbrella of the Speech Foundation of Ontario in sort of the late 90s at that time. So that's how Bob came to work with us. And what happened was we had 2 fairly distinct programs, both focusing on speech, but very different aspects. So Bob at this time was running the adult intensive stuttering program. And my program was a program for children who had speech difficulties. So young children, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. So we had that the speech piece was in common in terms of how is speech being produced, but the populations were different and the services were different. And we were even located in different buildings, so that we had kind of this loose affiliation. And then it was in the 2000s that our leases came up for both of our locations, and we came together under one roof on Duncan Mill, which you would be familiar with, Greg.
It is great to hear the history behind this, Margit. Wonderful. Why did the Speech and Stuttering Institute, formerly the Speech Foundation of Ontario, change its name then? Was that because of the merge, or?
Yes, just the confusion, because over the years, there was the Speech Foundation of Ontario, there was the Toronto Children's Centre, there was the stuttering program, I even forget what it was called at one point. So there were like all these names floating around, and it was really quite confusing. So we brought all of the programs together under the umbrella of the Speech and Stuttering Institute to reflect the areas of experience and expertise that we had as an organization.
So there's been a lot of changes, I guess, since the formation of this center. You've talked a lot about the changes of your position as well. Do you want to talk a bit about your current role and what you do currently with the Speech and Stuttering Institute?
As I mentioned before, I've been at the organization a long time, and I've probably been in almost every role that the organization can offer. So I am now winding down my career, and I've given over a lot of the sort of the program administration, which I've done for many years, over to a new clinical director. And I am focusing on the training piece that I've been involved in for many I'd say at least the last 10 years. And so what we have been doing over the last 10 years is providing workshops and training on how to assess and treat children who have motor speech difficulties. And we have received funding from the government to take the content of those workshops that we've developed and to convert them into e-learning courses to make them more accessible to individuals across the province. And so this past year, we worked on converting the motor speech training into an e-learning course, and we're rolling out that training currently. And this year we received funding to take our preschool fluency training workshop and convert that into an e-learning format. So I'm involved in and overseeing the development and the rollout of these training programs.
So I'll get you to look back on your career again, I guess. So before you were kind of in these more, I guess, coordinating type roles and you were working with clients, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but what were the populations that you were working with?
The bulk of my experience is working with preschoolers who have speech and language difficulties, and especially in a group format, working with 3 children who all have a similar need, and how do we do therapy in that context? So that has its own challenges. It has its advantages and its challenges. And then over the years at the Speech and Stuttering Institute, our program developed some expertise in motor speech disorders, and we began to get referrals for children who had more severe speech production difficulties. So our program began to specialize more in that area rather than the more general language difficulties or development, like the milder or more moderate speech difficulties that children may have. So definitely preschool speech and language is my area of clinical expertise.
Now, Margit, I think you may have answered number 5 already. What clinical programs falls under your portfolio responsibility for overseeing the development and evaluation of new treatment and professional training programs for children with motor speech disorders?
So if I look back, so I'll try to come at it from a slightly different angle. So part of my work over those years when I was more in management and administration was really monitoring what was happening in the field and looking at our program and identifying how did we need to develop to meet the emerging needs in the community. So when our program started, I mentioned that a lot of our children were 4- and 5-year-olds. But then there was this period where there was a real shift to early intervention, looking at how do you work with children who are 3 and younger. So we had this expertise and experience working with speech in 4- and 5-year-olds. And it's not just a matter of taking what you do with older children and doing the same with younger children. Younger children learn differently. They're at a different stage of development. So it was learning or trying to figure out what is it that we need to be doing with this age group and how do we do it so that it's developmentally appropriate. So that was look at, and then another area that we looked at was, certainly there weren't a lot of services for children who were school age. So we began to open up some school age programs for children who had speech difficulties. And at the same time, there were similar things happening in the fluency program. So Bob had started off the program for adults with his intensive program. And then there was this need for children who were school age. They needed therapy and intervention as well. So he was involved in the development of programs for school-age children who stutter. And then now in the more recent years, we've become involved in working with preschool children who are starting to show dysfluencies or are starting to show that it may be a more of an ongoing issue for them, and coming up with appropriate treatment programs for them. So part of the role over the years has been to look at where are the gaps in service, and what is it that the Speech and Stuttering Institute can do with the knowledge base that we have to start filling in these gaps with services that will help these individuals in these groups.
What research studies and publications, Margit, have you co-authored on the subject that you have participated in?
If we go back to the 90s, Deborah Hayden, who was then the executive director, she and I co-authored a chapter on group therapy. In the last 10 years, I was part of a provincial work group to look at how to assess and provide treatment to children who had motor speech difficulties. And we came up with a process for assessment and identification. And I co-authored a journal article for the Canadian Journal on the model that we developed. And then through our ministry training initiatives, we were able to hire a research scientist who actually helped us look at how to train speech pathologists in this motor speech treatment protocol that we've developed, and then to collect data to show that it worked and it was an effective way of providing service to this population of children. And from that research, a number of articles have been published.
So I'm gonna skip over some of the questions here, just like out of order a little bit, just because we were talking about early intervention. And I was just wondering if you wanted to kind of discuss a little bit the importance of early intervention in treatment.
Yes, early intervention is really important, because if you think about it, and this would be true for children who have speech difficulties or even are starting to show disfluencies, is the children are developing. They have these neurological systems that are still fairly flexible. And if we can get in there and provide the right environment and conditions, we still have more potential for changing the course of their development. If you leave it for too long, movement patterns become habituated. And so then when you do start treatment, you're having to not only learn something new, you're having to unlearn old ways of doing things. So it gets a bit harder as you work with older children. But with the young ones, it's like you're guiding the development. So early intervention is really important, but it's also very important that it's done appropriately. The methods that we use for working with clients who are school age, where we accept them to sit down and follow, your lead through activities and do more drill and repetition, which can work very well for older children. You can't get a 3-year-old or even a 2-year-old to do something like that. You really have to understand how do young children learn? How do you engage them? How do you motivate them? What is the appropriate goal for this stage of development? And how do we support that development, usually through working with the parents, because parents are the most important individuals in the children's lives. They're bonded to their parents. You're a stranger coming in, so you may or may not be able to work as effectively with the really, really young ones. And certainly when I've spoken to our clinicians, asking them, now that you're working with younger children, do you see any differences in the outcomes? And anecdotally, certainly, they are reporting that they do see faster progress with the younger children, and you can get some very good outcomes.
I'm really loving Greg's question list, because it's just like, however order we've found this, I'm asking questions that I'm really interested in, which is cool, because early intervention is something that I'm really excited to work with and focus on when I start my graduate program. But another question that Greg's got here is talking a little bit about the types of group therapy programs and also professional training workshops that you've developed. And I'm really interested in hearing about how you kind of developed and facilitated these professional training workshops, because that's something that I hope to develop myself in the future.
Well, the first thing is, you have to have your core content so that you really know what it is that you want to convey to clinicians. And at the Speech and Stuttering Institute, that's been developed through years of experience working with children, often with a certain model in mind, so that you get very proficient in working with that, and you start looking at patterns as to who is this working for, who is this not working for, how do we need to adjust it, how can we make it better. And so once you've sort of figured that out, then you need to figure out how are you going to convey that information to others. So the traditional way of doing it was standing up and just talking about it. Well, we know that that's not, in this day and age, that's not necessarily the best way to convey information. And adult learning principles have become very popular. And so it's looking at how can we take this information and chunk it in a way that really supports sort of adult learning. And there are core principles in the research where you need to explain and illustrate what you're doing. You need to give adults an opportunity to practice and give them feedback on what they're doing and how they're doing, and then to get them to reflect on their experience, what they are learning, what they are still struggling with. If there's sort of like a standard protocol is to first do this, then do this, and then do this, get them to compare if they're following it, so that the more you reflect on it, the deeper the learning goes. So when you're developing a training program, you want to kind of pull all of that in. So you're looking at, capturing people's attention, engaging them, explaining and illustrating, and giving them practice opportunities. So for the motor speech training that we did, we developed a 2-day training workshop. And within that, we also have case studies, because there's that whole knowledge base, but then how do you apply it? And clinicians always want to see, how do you actually do this with a client? So that's some of the thinking that went into developing our professional training workshops.
Margit, just following up on Katelyn's thought, because you see, I mean, this whole area of preschool, school age, different motor speech, which I'm not familiar with, but now just thinking more about this, you see, this is a new addition to the Some Stutter Law podcast, because a lot of the SLPs listen to us, and this is another area of education for them, besides the stuttering aspect. Now I'm just wondering now, for the when do you think the alarm bells go off with parents when they sense there's something, there's a communication disfluency with their preschool child? When do you think that happens, or what normally triggers the parents to contact the institute?
For children who have speech problems, often the reason parents would contact us is because their children aren't talking, or they've reached a certain age and they only have maybe a few words, or they may be talking, but when they're talking, parents don't understand what they're saying because they're leaving out sounds, or substituting sounds. So the real concern is just this lack of speech development, or this inability to communicate with their child. So that would be sort of for the speech side, why they would be calling us. From the fluency side, often parents will start noticing that they are disfluent. It's interesting. I've spoken with some of our fluency staff, and they'll say that after Christmas, often referrals will increase. And they think it's sort of like two reasons. One is that the parents have spent a lot more time with their children and have actually had an opportunity to listen to them and talk to them more. And they've noticed that they're disfluent. Or sometimes it's also the excitement and the disruption in routines, over Christmas, that would also maybe increase his fluency in children. But often parents will notice that their child is starting to have some stuttering-like behaviors and get concerned and call us.
What are some of the obstacles that are problematic for successful clinical intervention with preschool and school-age children?
Yeah, the first two words that come to my mind are motivation and attention, because to work really with young children, they need to be motivated and they need to be attending. I came across a really good, what I will call formula about what promotes learning. It's like it's attention plus effort results in learning. So you really want the children to be engaged and attending and doing something in order for that learning to happen. And with younger children, some children just have a really hard time attending, and if they're not motivated to work on speech, which honestly is not the most exciting thing for some children, and it's hard work for some children to really change the way they're speaking. So the challenge for a speech pathologist is to really understand how to engage and motivate, when to push, when to back off, how to keep students engaged so that they do keep learning and working at something that is essentially hard work for them.
And what are some of the obstacles that parents need to be aware of for successful intervention?
One of the things that is really important for parents to understand is the importance of regular practice. So when the children are learning a new skill, that home practice is really important, because with fluency and with motor speech, it's very much a motor skill, and the more you do it, the more it becomes a habit and automatic, and that just comes through use. And if you don't use it, it's not changing. So parents need to be aware of the importance of regular and consistent practice, but also to understand when to practice and when to give the children a break. You can't be constantly correcting them, constantly making them change the way they speak. Children need to have times when they just communicate and get whatever is on their heart and mind, out into the open. So knowing when not to be correcting, and then understanding what they're working on and why they're working on it and how to work on it. So involving the parents, helping them develop their understanding and their skills is really important. So parents need to understand as well that they're an important partner in the process. We can work with a child once a week, but that's not enough to change. You need things happening during the week as well. So it requires some effort on everyone's part to start changing sort of these speaking patterns and getting them to a point where they're more automatic and become just a more habitual way for the child to be speaking.
So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. So one of the topics that we bring up a lot on the podcast is the emotional component of stuttering and fluency disorders and the mental health impacts. And so obviously, since you don't work with fluency clients, it's not something that you're, super familiar with, but something that I feel really strongly about is just emphasizing counseling, psychology, and mental health in the field of SLP in general. And so I'm wondering if you want to comment on maybe the importance of addressing these kind of mental health impacts within speech therapy in general, because any form of communication problem is going to lead to frustration, lack of confidence, all these kinds of things in anybody who's experiencing it.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, Katelyn. It's not, certainly it's an element in stuttering therapy, but it's common across communication, because when we speak, we are conveying our thoughts, our emotions, our feeling. We're also creating impressions. So there's a lot tied up with the way we speak and communicate. And certainly from working with young children who have speech problems, there's a huge amount of frustration if they can't be understood by others. And you do see things like, behavior issues coming out. You also see children who withdraw into themselves. They don't, they've given up. They know they can't make themselves understood, so they don't even bother communicating, and you see them withdrawing. So you do see a social, emotional impact of a communication difficulty in young children, and certainly with adults as well. And in speech therapy, whether it's for stuttering or for speech, one of the things that is important for all clinicians to remember is that we're not just dealing with the mouth. There's a person behind that. And you really need to look at the whole person, the whole individual, and treat the various aspects. So one of the things, I was thinking about advice, Katelyn, is, for you as a future speech pathologist, is to really understand, all the different components that come together in a person. And the more you understand why something is going on, then you know where to start including or addressing your intervention. Because if you're just looking at what's happening at the mouth level, that's a piece of it, and you can start changing that. But that's not going to be effective unless you understand what's also contributing to that, and dealing some of the underlying factors, such as that iceberg, right? In stuttering therapy, there's a little bit that's above the surface, there's a lot underneath the surface. So as long as we're dealing with people, we have to recognize all the different things that are going on underneath the surface and address those in the way we do therapy. So sometimes you may be focusing on the mouth because there is a skill that has to be learned at that level. But it's also important to understand what else is going on. And, this is a simple little, statement that we all hear and know, but it is so true. It's like success breeds success. You need a little bit of success, a little bit of change to help people say, hey, something's different. I can change this. And to feel that energy that comes along with, okay, I can do something more. And it can happen with exercising, with dieting. It can happen with anything. It can happen with speech therapy where you're saying something more clearly or you're saying something more fluently, like something has changed. I'm motivated now to change something more. So as a clinician, the way we set up therapy and do things, we have to make sure that we're building in success early on, because that's what's going to motivate people. So, and that is, and once you're motivated, then that's also, and seeing things change, that also builds up confidence. One of the stories I thought I would share is that during the summer, we ran intensive fluency programs for adolescents, for students. And at the beginning, and it was in a group format, in the beginning, they would come into the building and they'd all sit there isolated, not talking, not communicating. And then over the course of the program, you could see them just gaining confidence and suddenly interacting with each other. And it was just so powerful to see that not only was their speech changing, but their social skills, their confidence. It was just amazing to watch. So it's all integrated, and a good clinician will certainly be able to understand and address all of the different pieces.
I know a lot of SLPs listen to this podcast, and the one thing that I really like to the point I like to drive home is you're treating a whole person, not just a disorder. And that's something that I'm hoping to take with me when I through my graduate program and when I'm working as well. So
very important piece of information to always keep at the forefront of your mind. You're dealing with the whole person. Yeah.
Margit, when we talk about the emotional component of speech fluency, the below the surface of the iceberg, and I also assume this goes for the preschoolers, but how do you educate the parents become more aware or work with their own feelings, emotional feelings about the speech disfluency of their child? What strategies do you use to support them, the parents?
That's a very good question. And I'm drawing my parallels again from my experience working with the speech kiddies. I think it's really important for the parents to understand the challenges that the child is facing, because I think if you have some understanding, then again, you can start problem solving. I think it's really important to support the parents, because if they're anxious, they definitely are transferring their anxiety onto the child, whether they realize it or not, in the way they react, even if it's a nonverbal reaction. Children pick up on things like that. So it's very important to support the parents. And it's in giving the parents a chance to express their concerns, share their concerns, providing them with information, providing them with support, letting them know that, it's a process, that you'll be there to guide them through it, always keeping that door open. Because especially for children who have dysfluencies, it's really important that parents are aware of the emotional impact that this is having on their child, but that they are also ready to be able to support the child. And in order to support the child well, they may need to be supported and have worked through their own concerns about the situation.
Would you be able to talk on like the transition of like a preschooler to school age, making this transition from preschool to school? What supports would the child, the parent, and the teachers need to make a healthy transition, especially if the child has been in therapy?
Yeah, communication is essential between all of the agencies. And there is this, I don't know how it is in Newfoundland, but certainly in Ontario, that is something that, the Ministry of Children and Youth and Education are trying to work collaboratively to make that transition smoother. So we need to, have good programs in place for the preschoolers, but then we need programs in place for the school age children. And then we need some way of transferring a child from one program smoothly into the other program. So there needs to be, communication with the parent to let them know what the situation is in the school board, what are the services like, who to connect with, to let the school board know that this is a child who has had a certain type of therapy and will be needing more, and to sort of discuss that with the speech pathologist who would be taking over the case. So there's some real communication and strategic planning that needs to go to take place during that transition from the preschool system into the school age services.
All right, so I'm gonna, my closing question, I guess we could say. So our podcast, we focus on awareness, acceptance, education of stuttering, but there's obviously quite a wide variety of speech and language communication disorders out there. And so what are some ways that we can, I guess, work to advocate for those as well as part of our podcast? Any thoughts, any thoughts you might have? It's a kind of a loaded question.
I have to think about that one. Are you thinking of topics or other disorders that?
Just, I guess, ways in which that we can advocate for the community of individuals with communication, language, speech disorders, not exclusively stuttering.
It helps, I think, if you identify, usually you start through often a personal connection. So start small. If there's another population, maybe motor speech disorders after today's topic would be a good one, because this is a population of children, and often children who stutter may have some motor speech issues. So that would be possibly an area that would link well, and start with that and building on that. And then there may be another sort of event or disorder or something that happens that is maybe being highlighted due to an event or whatever. And if that's an interest, then to sort of start expanding that. So starting small and I guess building out in circles or ripples. But I will put in a plug for motor speech disorders. I know in Alberta, they have the iStar program. I heard that they also have a program there for children with motor speech disorders. So they've combined those two populations over there as well as we have at the Speech and Stuttering Institute.
We have a close friend and volunteer with the NLSA and the podcast who is starting a placement at iStar this summer. So she's going to come chat with us. So that's a bridge there.
Great. And it would be interesting to know if they are continuing with that program. I know that they were doing that a few years ago. So get an update.
Margit, just listening to you this morning, the wheels have started to turn in my head as well as Katelyn's head as well about this podcast. You see, what as you were, and I feel as well that that I really have been spoiled with my experience with the Speech and Stuttering Institute. So when I moved to, because I received so much support over the years with Dr. Cole and the staff at the SSI, that so when I came to Newfoundland, I was expecting to see to sort of see this awareness of stuttering in the province, and so, and I was really surprised that stuttering has not under the lens of the province within Newfoundland. There's very little attention paid to stuttering. There's several gaps in service deliveries for people who stutter and parents. And so through this we have developed under the leadership of Dr. Paul Decker. Paul is an associate professor of linguistics at Memorial, and so when we started to, part of the Newfoundland Labrador Stuttering Association. Newfoundland Labrador Stuttering Association as well. When we started to promote the NLSA, we always got this question. We are aware that there's deficits, but what about the numbers? Where's the evidence that there is deficits in treatment programs for people who stutter? And so this is a gap, and this is where the Solidarity Project came into play. So we have developed 4 surveys, one for SLPs, people who stutter, parents of people who stutter, and teachers. So anyhow, so we finalized the survey. So we're in the process of sending these out to all the schools and the health authorities. Well, so based on the data that that we will be collecting, that will be our next steps to identify service and gaps for people who stutter. However, now just thinking about the whole area of the motor speech disorders, see, I'm not familiar, and this is something I think Katelyn, this is another area that Katelyn, the actual Solidarity Project will have to explore. What supports are there for preschool, school-age children? We were very blessed to have the first Fluency Plus program training done for 17 SLPs in the province, and this is the first specialized program we've had for people who stutter. However, come to think of it now, there has been an expressed interest in the same program offered through the SSI for preschoolers. So I think that, just to make a long story short, there's a definite need. I think I sense now that for motor speech support for SLPs. Well, what do you think, Katelyn? The wheels turning with you?
Yeah, I think in stuttering, in motor speech, in just about every area of SLP in Newfoundland, we can use a little extra support. I know everything that I've heard is that speech language pathologists just have the most broad caseloads. They don't have time to specialize in anything because they just have too many clients and they have too many diverse needs. So I think going forward, whatever we can do to support SLPs and support clients with specialized needs in any capacity is useful and important.
And I certainly appreciate that challenge, because in Ontario, it's a large province, and I've had the opportunity to work with clinicians across Ontario. And when we do the training, the larger population centers, in their staff, they may have people who have specialized in some area because they have so many and they have so many children. Children who are clinicians who are in more rural or northern parts of the province, they have a very generic caseload and they have to be able to manage everyone. And because of distances and issues, it's really, really challenging because you can't know everything and you can't often provide service at the intensity that you would like to. So just some thoughts on that. Now with COVID and the development of virtual services, that certainly makes it a little bit easier, to reach some people. Also, maybe this whole idea of developing some individuals with specialty and expertise who can become the consultants, because, certainly at the Speech and Stuttering Institute, after the training that we've done with our provincial SLPs, they have access to consulting services where they can, brainstorm or discuss a client with an SLP and just confirm that maybe, this is what's going on, or these are the goals that you should be working on, or if this isn't working, what else can I be doing? Am I missing something? So having some type of a consultant support network would possibly be very helpful as well, so that people, wherever they are in Newfoundland, would be able to at least consult with someone when they do get a more challenging client. And that's the other beauty of the e-learning courses that we're developing. We're in the very early stages, but once you have an e-learning course up and running, you can access that at any time from any location. And so training hopefully may become more accessible once we have these e-learning courses up and running.
Margit, are there any other institutes similar to the Speech and Stuttering Institute in Canada, or is the SSI is the primary specialized center? Are you aware?
Well, we're pretty, well, our origins are pretty unique and we've kind of evolved. I know iStar certainly has a similar focus and strong history, so I'm aware of them. There are other, people who have been trained, let's say in motor speech through, through the US. They have an apraxia training program that is open sometimes to some Canadians. But that again is more sort of individualized or individual client, clinician based. In terms of actual institutes which focus on the training and the research, I really am not familiar with any others. So we are pretty unique.
So true, so true. We work with the NLSA works with the we're in partnership in many ways with the NLASPA, the Newfoundland Labrador Association of Speech Language Pathologists and Audiologists, and this is something, Katelyn, I think we should explore. Are there any? And there may be about 200 SLPs, private and public, in Newfoundland, but this is the question we should ask the NLSA and the LASPA. Is there anyone specialized? You know what I mean? Perhaps we can, in terms of consulting, whatever down the road. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think somebody just needs to start the movement. There's not a lot of SLPs that are specialized right now because it's just not possible with the amount of work they have to do. But down the road, I mean, I'm hoping to be an SLP working in Newfoundland in a few years. So this is a goal.
So we're looking towards you with broad shoulders to be the trailblazer, to be the trailblazer.
Oh gosh.
And
No pressure.
no pressure at all. And Margit, this is one area as well stuttering anyhow is the emotional component. It's so neglected as a person who stutters. You know what I mean? That I realize that since I've started this podcast, I'm learning so much more about stuttering. It's such a magnitude of areas and how stuttering can affect one's quality of life in many ways. And so interesting area. That's okay. So I mean, this has been an excellent interview. I'm sure we have many more questions to ask you, and but I've learned a lot. And as I was saying, that I mean, the wheels are turning, you know. And now, do you have any questions for us now?
I'm just wondering about the services in Newfoundland. Is there, in Ontario over the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years, actually, they've started up sort of a provincial program for preschool children that meet certain criteria, so that there are agencies that are all sort of working together to create services across the province. Is there anything sort of organized at the government level in Newfoundland, or is it agencies that provide the service and you get differences between different towns or areas of the province?
Well, you see, this is what, well, to be honest with you, I can't answer the question, but based on my knowledge base is that we have SLPs working within the school system, within the health authorities, and we have we have speech language pathologists working in Labrador, that because there is a definite shortage of SLPs within the system. They travel from school to school, they fly here and there, so there's a lot of gaps in services to service delivery for preschool, school age, and adults. But but I think, make a long story short, and correct me if I'm wrong, Katelyn, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of identifying the service gaps for all these areas now, preschool, school age, adolescents.
One of the most sort of positive experiences, I would say, in my career was being part of a provincial work group on motor speech disorders, on the assessment and the identification, assessment, and treatment. Just looking at what was happening in the province, looking to the literature, and then working and collaborating with colleagues to come up with what is the best thing for us to be doing in the province to provide intervention for this population of children. It's so stimulating to be able to work with colleagues who have a similar passion, interests, looking to the literature, comparing it with practice, and coming up with a model. So again, maybe just, for now, sticking with the stuttering piece, because that's where you've identified the need, you have the passion, but to find some individuals who are really passionate about it, who want to come together, because that's where all the ideas and the energy start brewing and exciting things happen. Because from that work group, we came up with this, what we thought was an exciting way of managing the identification and deciding what treatment to provide for children, and how we identify the children who need a certain approach. And from that, the group, we did a presentation at ASHA. We did a presentation at the Canadian conference. At that point, it wasn't SAC, but at SAC, a journal article came out of it, and our motor speech training program came out of it at the SSI. And it starts snowballing when you've got a group of people who are passionate, excited, and there are other supports that need to be in place. You need the provincial government funding piece in there as well. But if you can get a group of people working together to come up with an idea and a plan and a process, that is really helpful. And just another example from Ontario's history. It was actually for the speech, what was in the Speech Foundation of Ontario, is our ministry representative at that time. No, sorry, that's the wrong story. We had come up with a plan for the children's program, and the government was looking at funding options for something to honor the International Year of the Child. And they were saying, no, we can't fund this, we can't fund this. Well, we had somebody in government who had this proposal, and he said, well, if you can't fund this, then you can fund this. And he showed our proposal. And that's actually how we got the initial funding for the children's program. Another example for the preschool services that have been developing in Ontario is our consultant had a plan in place. And at an opportune moment when the government was looking for something, she said, well, here is a plan. And it just it was the right thing at the right time, and it took off from there, and it changed services in Ontario. So sometimes you need to get people together. A plan may sit on a shelf for a while, but when that moment happens, you're ready to move. So that's just from our experience, some thoughts that getting people together, planning, coming up with that vision, and then the timing can actually spark, or an opportunity can be created where that plan is ready to implement.
Well, Katelyn, we have lots to discuss, and lots of food for thought as well. And you're right, Margit. I think it's important for like-minded people to try to come together to talk about these things. And I mean, this is, as I was saying, this is one area that Katelyn and I will need to explore as to what supports are out there for preschoolers, or what specialties or whatever. And this is where we need to bring some of the SLPs from the last PA to the table, whatever, So anyhow, this is turning to a full-time job, Retirement.
I've heard it said, you're not retired, just tired.
But anyhow, I mean, But anyhow, I mean, thanks a lot, Margie. This has been an excellent interview. Thank you very much.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And it's exciting to hear what you're doing in Newfoundland, Greg. I think, you've started the process, and it's wonderful. Katelyn, you are heading into the profession with an amazing background. So good luck. And this will continue to grow, and it'll be amazing to see what it looks like, down the road. So congratulations on some excellent work that you've started, and best of luck as you move forward with that.
Thank you, Margit.
Bye. Some Stutter La, Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast about stuttering, has so much to talk about. Let's start listening.
This has been an episode of Some Stutter La, Newfoundland and Labrador's first podcast about stuttering. Some Stutter La is hosted and produced by Greg O'Grady, Katelyn Mayo, Emily Murphy, Dr. Paul Decker, and Luca Dinu. Some Stutter La is available on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and Radio Public. You can also check out the Some Stutter La channel on YouTube. To ask a question, send us a comment or suggestion, or just to get in touch, find us online at Some Stutter Podcast on Instagram, or at Some Stutter La Pod on Facebook. Thanks for listening.